For more on U.S. China trade tensions, let's welcome Tom Friedman. He is the New York Times foreign affairs columnist. He's also the author of Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. His latest New York Times column is focused on the latest U.S. China trade tensions and describes President Trump and China's President Xi as being locked in a cage match over control of the global economy. And Tom, thanks for being here. It's good to see you.
You too, Becky. Thank you.
So your column looks even more prescient based on what we've heard out of Beijing this morning. It looks like this is ratcheting up. It looks like there's no end in sight.
Yeah, I really think where we need to go on this now, Becky, is we got to get off Twitter, both sides. They're going to have to sit down face to face. It's pretty clear to me that the kind of deal that the Trump administration was aspiring to, which is a deal that would actually codify in Chinese law more market access, basically, for American and worldwide goods into the China market. That's just not possible right now. It's pretty clear that the Chinese system simply can't handle that. I think the best outcome would be is if the two leaders sit down, or their representatives, on some Pacific atoll away from all the press, and basically reach some informal understandings. China will agree to buy more American goods, but also open its markets in ways that it does not codify in law, which Xi Jinping clearly fears will make him look too weak. And America agrees to postpone some of the tariffs. I think that's where this will end ultimately. How we get there and when, I can't predict.
That sounds reasonable, but how do you do that in a way that both sides can save face?
Well, I think you do it by basically the United States saying we're going to lift all postpone the tariffs or temporarily lift them for the next 6 months or a year. We'll see how China does. And China will say, we will be opening our markets more, but nobody puts anything in writing, and we'll just have to see where we are at the end of a year. I think that's about the most the traffic can bear right now.
You know, you've been behind the President Trump's push to try and take China to task on a lot of these unfair trade situations. The idea of backing off at this point and saying, OK, we'll wait and see what happens. I mean, I feel like we got to this point partially because the Chinese had been stalling again, which is a tactic they're pretty good at.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, you know, one of the things that's always, I think, important when you talk about China, Becky, I prefer not to use the word China. I prefer to use the term 1/6 of humanity. That's what we're dealing with here. And it moves slowly, and they're moved slowly. So, you know, my feeling was the president was right, that the structure of U.S. China trade had changed, and the game had to be called in this sense. China got rich over the last 30 years, went from poor to middle income, using three sort of bucket strategies. One bucket was hard work, delayed gratification, long-term planning, smart investments in infrastructure, smart investments in education. Bucket number one. Bucket number two was basically non-reciprocal trade arrangements, forced technology transfers, and stealing intellectual property. Bucket number three, by the way, very important, was relying on the U.S. Pacific Fleet, because our fleet's presence in Asia assured all of China's neighbors that China could dominate them economically, but would not dominate them geopolitically. That was the strategy China used to grow over the last 30 years around, metaphorically speaking, toys, T-shirts, and tennis shoes. But the character of what China makes today and wants to export to us has fundamentally changed. Now it's batteries, it's electric cars, it's AI, it's smartphones. And if we let, going forward, China to use that same strategy it used to grow from poverty to middle income, to grow from middle income to high income, we, the Europeans, all of China's trading partners, would be crazy. So the game had to be called. Now, my view was the best way to do it was for us to actually sign TPP, align with the Europeans, create a broad front around global market access rules. I was not a fan of the tariff strategy, but I was a fan of getting tough. I think the president was right to do that. The game had to be called.
Yeah, Tom, it sounds like we need to dredge up to kick the can down the road. So that's all we're going to do when this is
Joe,
done.
I wish there was a better strategy. You see the pain in being inflicted on both societies, and right. I just don't see how this is going to come to resolution.
We won't get what we want, but do you, in your view, and you've seen it happen at the Arab Spring, we remember the fall of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall, do you see the seeds of anything similar to that in Hong Kong? And you know, we have talked about eventual regime change in China, and then we'd be dealing with a completely different set of parameters. Or do you think culturally 1/6 of the world's humanity responds effectively under an autocratic government? Well, can it stay like that forever? It just seems like eventually there's an awakening where they want what the rest of the world has, and they know what we have in terms of freedom.
Joe, I think you're asking probably the most important sort of geopolitical question in the world today, which is kind of with or China. And my view on this has been China was on a path. China today is so much more open than it was 30 years ago, and it's so much more closed today than it was 5 years ago. That Xi Jinping really took China on a right turn backwards. And a lot of people have written they found a magic formula where you can have kind of state control of the economy, political repression, and innovation. I don't buy that. I think in the long term they're going to have to open, but they're going to have to open on their own terms in their own way. And I think what Hong Kong tells you, and I would add to Hong Kong, Joe, Istanbul, the election there, what's going on in Russia today, is that people, God bless them, have bodies and souls. And anytime a regime thinks it can feed just one and not the other for the long term, they tend to make a mistake. And so I think Xi Jinping, I think, Joe, he's one of the most important players in the story that we don't know anything about. What do we know? Last May, the U.S. and China actually seemed to be on the verge of a deal. And then all of a sudden, the Chinese made a giant U-turn. We know that happened. Why did that happen? What is Xi Jinping thinking? What, by the way, we all know basically what Trump's position is. Does anyone have any clue what Xi's position is? Is he in favor of no market opening here? So I don't think the Chinese have done a very good job of explaining their position as well. And it's one of the things that really concerns me. Now you introduce Hong Kong into this story, which is a hugely neuralgic issue for them. And you have the seeds of a real explosion.
We just heard from Tom. We have a soul, Becky. That's what I'm going to take away from this. That we all have bodies.
Even you, Joe.
Just what color is my soul? Andrew tells me it's like this dark, deep, right? Sort of at least a slate gray. But that's good to know. Anyway.